Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Tuesday night Bison chat. Galen Clavio here. Joe Cronin there. No, there he is right there. And welcome back as we get ready to talk IU football. So much to talk about, and I am so excited to get this episode going. And first of all, before we get to any of the football talk, happy birthday, Joe. It was your birthday yesterday, and I kind of got lost in the shuffle with the travel back and everything, but happy birthday, buddy. Hope that it was a good one for you.
Thank you. It was. Shout out to my parents for taking me out to dinner, Malibu Grill last night. It was great. I mean, definitely was tired for a little bit of jet lag, the red-eye flight, but it was a good birthday. 21, so look at that.
That's what a great weekend for you. You watch Indiana win the first game that they've ever played or had a chance to win in the Rose Bowl, I guess, other than 1968, and then he turned 21 2 days later. That's a nice college weekend for anybody, you know.
Yeah, not something that I really had on my bingo card heading. I guess when I was looking at the end of this year, like, oh, my birthday's on a Monday, but then being able to come back from California, I can be like, that was really freaking cool.
We got a ton of things to talk about in this show, and we're going to be going through and looking at what happened in Pasadena as IU with a huge victory over UCLA, not just in terms of the magnitude of the win in terms of margin, but the way that really broke a lot of the ice psychologically, I think, for a lot of folks within the IU family, both internally and outside. There'd been a lot of concern, some concern trolling as well about the quality of opponents the first couple of weeks. And it's fascinating. Everybody said, well, let's wait until they play UCLA. They go out and they wallop UCLA, and suddenly it's like, well, UCLA wasn't very good. So already the goalposts being moved. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the overall Rose Bowl experience through Joe's eyes, through my eyes. And then we're also going to, of course, talk about this weekend's upcoming game as IU back home in Memorial Stadium taking on the Charlotte 49ers. So all of that ahead here in this next 30 minutes. Joe, let's just kind of launch right in. We do have Daniel Flick joining us from the Indiana Daily Student, who was also out there covering the game. He'll be with us in about 5 minutes. But let's go ahead and dive in and talk a little bit about what this Indiana team did in this contest. You don't have to pick a phase of the game to focus on to be impressed with what Indiana did. Let's start with the offense, though, and we got some highlights to show you. This IU offense was on fire really from the get-go, Joe. The passing game taking over where the running game didn't quite have the same amount of juice that it had in the first two games. Curtis Rourke, the offensive player of the week in the Big Ten, he was absolutely extraordinary.
Right. That is Indiana's first offensive player of the week since week 13 of the 2015 season. That was Nate Sudfeld,
yes,
who was granted that award back in the day. It seems like back in the day, 2015 is wild. But what a performance from him. I mean, in those first two games, FIU and Western Illinois, he was looking sharp. I mean, he has that big 6'5" frame. He's patient in the pocket, 6th-year senior. So he's not really going to try and force a lot. And this one, Big Ten opponent, say what you want about UCLA. I mean, he was dialed in, 75% completion percentage, 300 yards. The first four touchdown game from a Hoosier quarterback since 2020. Michael Penix did that 4 seasons ago. So really remarkable performance from him. And I just goes to show that Cignetti got his guy with Rourke.
I mean, I was talking about this earlier today, and it's like, who in college football right now, outside of a handful of teams, wouldn't love to have this Curtis Rourke as their starting quarterback? Tremendous credit to Curt Cignetti and Tino Sunseri and the whole offensive staff for identifying this as their guy, getting him in here. And, something that I think is worth noting, and we've got an interview with Rhett Lewis that's going to come later on in the week where he mentions this. I wanted to give him credit. Rourke didn't look completely dialed in the first couple of weeks. It was clear he was kind of still figuring out the parameters of the offense and the timing. But, man, not only was I impressed with his playmaking ability in this game, but the fact that he was able to do it oftentimes in third and long situations due to the running attack not working well or due to penalties really highlighted even more how impressive his game was and how quickly he's picked up this offense and is really moving pieces around.
Yeah, I think it was a two-part sequence for this UCLA game. He was very patient on those 3rd and long. He was finding the gaps, finding what was open, but also the UCLA defensive scheme was very interesting. When it came to 3rd down, they were sending the house. They
Yeah.
were blitzing, mixing zone blitz packages, and a guy like Rourke, he was experienced enough where he knew where he wanted to throw to. And like you said, like with the timing, he relied on a guy that he has relied on before with Miles Cross. What a game from him. Also transferred in from Ohio, was one of his favorite targets these past couple of years, combined for like 1,100 yards over the past 2 seasons. And he's really come into his own, made a spectacular catch in the FIU game, made a nice one-handed catch down on that get them down onto the goal line against UCLA, was the leading receiver. And you could see that connection right there is having a guy that you could trust in a game like this.
Let's go ahead and bring in from the Indiana Daily student, Daniel Flick, on the show. Daniel, how you doing? Good to see you. It's been like a whole 3 hours since I saw you.
Yeah, we're doing well, man. We just wrapped up some football press conference stuff here. I learned that apparently the Waffle House nickname for Elijah Surratt is legit. Like, people actually call him that. It was not like self-anointed, which I 100% have gone about my life the last week assuming that was self-anointed. So
Breaking news from the football complex here. Thank you for updating us. So I never really have I've had a nickname like that. It's mostly just been a shortening of my own name. I'm always fascinated how these things come about, but it's good to know he didn't just bring it on himself, because we always kind of looked askance when I was in college at people who nicknamed themselves anything. That was always like, okay, well, I don't know about you.
Oh, I 100% thought he was one of those guys. But apparently, I think it was Keyshawn Williams put it on him sometime in the summer, is what Miles Cross just said. So I'm very glad. I think that's a green flag for Elijah Surratt from a character perspective. So.
Yeah. Daniel, we were just talking about the offense for IU in this UCLA game. Give us your impressions of that offense and where the most impressive aspects of it were.
I thought it was within the versatility and variety of weapons that Indiana has. I want to say there was like 6 receivers who had at least 3 receptions. There's just such a deep crop of playmakers there, and I thought it was really neat as well watching Mike Shanahan utilize all of them in a variety of ways. I think, the interesting part about it, and the number that I keep coming back to, McCulley, who led Indiana last year in receiving and yards and all of that, I want to say in receiving scores as well, played about 2 or 3 snaps, it felt like, saw 1 target, very minimal role, and you go on the road and you throw for 307 yards. It was an incredibly impressive performance, and really, in my eyes, highlighted just how deep of a group of weapons Indiana has, and also the experience within that group too. It's a deep crop, but a crop that's played a whole lot of football, and I think you saw that show up early on the road.
One of the things I noted about McCulley, because we were a little surprised that he wasn't more central to the offense, kind of didn't need to be because of how well everybody else was playing. But I mean, I remember there was one of the touchdowns, I think it was one of the Keyshawn touchdowns, where McCulley takes the corner route or the flag route, and then Keyshawn comes short, catches the touchdown pass, and McCulley just comes over and is celebrating with him. And it's just like, okay, I feel like we've had past circumstances where perhaps guys aren't completely bought in if they're not getting targets. It does feel like you've got the whole collective really celebrating together and feeling like they're a part of things. And it feels like who gets to star in every given game kind of changes from game to game, and people seem to be okay with that so far. That's huge for this Indiana team, given the number of weapons that they've got. It's hard to keep everybody happy, so you got to make sure that there's some esprit de corps there.
Right, yeah, and I think it was Miles Cross just said that a few minutes ago, that they had a conversation on the sideline Saturday about how, each week there might be somebody new who stands out, who steps up, and you could really see that the way that Cross played on Saturday. I think he came in kind of middle of the road in terms of Indiana's receiving production, and ended up having like 6 for 90 and a touchdown. So it's a very deep, very, very deep group, especially when you kind of look at last year, when the last month of the year it was McCulley and EJ Williams, who have a combined 1 catch so far. So it's very, very interesting seeing how they've completely remodeled that room.
Let's talk about the defense a little bit for this IU team, as they also had a really good game, and it almost kind of got lost in the shuffle. It wasn't just how much they bottled up UCLA in terms of their progression down the field, but it was also, they forced a couple of turnovers. They really disrupt the timing of UCLA's passing game, like all over the place, and it just felt like they had control of the game from an early stage and never really let up. They had a little bit of a lull at the end of the first half, and Cignetti was clearly not happy about that. But to watch them bend but not break, something we always heard about the Tom Allen era defenses, and it really kind of got less and less true every year. Like, this team really does do that, where it's like we saw it in Western Illinois, we saw it in FIU. They move down the field, those teams do, but they get stopped at a point, and then Indiana capitalizes on offense. Has to be galvanizing for that defense, and it's been fascinating watching them kind of coalesce into this unit that is able to handle most of what's been thrown at them so far.
Yeah, I mean, they also battled a little bit of adversity with this game, having 2 ejections with CJ West on the targeting, where he was diving for that ball, helmet to helmet on Garbers, and then the D'Angelo Pons. And whether or not those were legit, obviously heard some fans screaming at the TV, screaming from the Rose Bowl. There was a good IU contingent that was present. But, I mean, like you said, they bent a little bit. It seems like clockwork now that last drive in the first half of the opponent, they're going to score. It's 3 for 3 now that a team has scored on that final drive in the first half. But other than that, they look so sharp. And through the ejections, they still played so well. They played fast and physical. Something that Cignetti said on Saturday night is like, we wanted to play physical and nasty. And he said it with this tone. It was like they did what he said they would. And that's kind of been the tail of the tape with this team and with him, is they have lived up to every promise up to this point that he's been talking about since he was hired.
Daniel, thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I think Bryant Haynes, I'm a bit of a football nerd in terms of like the schematic like packages that teams throw at offenses, and I like Bryant Haynes. Everything that he does is just so exciting to me to watch. The one play, the one schematic drop I keep coming back to is IU had, I think it was like a 3rd down. It was when Amari Farrell had his sack off the edge. He's lined up in his normal rover spot, and you've got like 3 or 4 linemen up front. They drop Linnell Carr, and Amari Farrell rushes off the opposite end. They sacked UCLA for a loss of about 10 yards, completely just ended that drive. And it was one of those deals where it was such a unique, creative package, and it kind of like made me feel a certain type of way. I mean, I was excited about it. So that's a unit that is completely rallied around a very creative mind in Bryant Haynes. And you can tell, because again, a lot of the pieces there, it's a lot of new, but there's also a lot of pieces who are back from last year who are playing at a completely new level. And so that's one of the things I kept coming back to a whole lot Saturday night, is just how well coached this team is. Yeah. I think Bryant Haynes especially is just phenomenal.
Daniel, I do want to kind of piggyback off of that, and it starts with those guys in the middle. It's Aiden Fisher and Jalen Walker. Those two, and they even mentioned it, Cignetti even mentioned it, those two were the ones holding that team together through the ejections, through the plenty of penalties that were thrown out. And Fisher in these 3 games has just looked fantastic. He has just been everywhere, making hard tackles, breaking up passes, and that is a guy, as a leader standpoint, that is coming from the Bryant Haynes system at JMU, knows this team. I mean, what a guy to have as your really focal point of the defense.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's fantastic. I think, it's so important to have those 2 veterans who've played in this system before, who have an innate understanding of what they're trying to accomplish there. I think the secondary as well has played at an extremely high level. Pons entered the year with high expectations. A lot of people, I recall the PFF list having him as like a top 5 corner inside the conference. But it's more than just him. I think Jameer Johnson's played at a very high level. You look at Amari Farrell, you look at Sanguinetti, Asbury. It's a very, very solid group. And I think a lot of people thought that UCLA may test them a little bit. And if that was the first test, in my eyes, they aced it.
We had a comment from longtime listener Ross Didson. Love Sig. How does IU ensure Florida State or Florida don't poach him or his assistants? It's an interesting question. I mean, and actually, I might argue West Virginia might be the bigger danger with Cignetti than anybody else, given the long-standing history his family has as his father coaching there. But it's an interesting moment in time, because this is Florida and Florida State, I think, for various reasons on the head coach level, probably not looking, but this is the price of success in college football, is that if you've got great assistants, you've either got to pay to keep them because their market price goes up, or you've got to have people in mind to come in and replace them and not miss a beat. And I think, as we saw with Tom Allen, that is oftentimes the hardest thing to do in college football, because you're going to lose people either to head coaching opportunities or better assistant opportunities. But I think this is where IU, given the investments they've made in the football program in general, this is the dogs you're running with now. So you're going to have to try to figure that out ahead of time. And my hope would be, it looks like something special is brewing here in Bloomington, particularly with this group. You got to try to put the fence up around it and say, like, this is the place these people want to be. We can recruit for the future here. We can do all the things we need. We've got the NIL money. That would be the hope, I guess. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts? Daniel, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Joe on this.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in the idea that for head coaches, having an eye for other coaching talent is just as, if not more important than having an eye when you're recruiting. I think you can look back at Tom Allen's era, and you can look at the staff that he had around him in 2019 and 20, and then you look at the one that he had towards the end of his era, and you can kind of see why things ended the way that they did. And so I do think it's kind of surprising to me that Bryant Haynes and Mike Shanahan have lasted with Cignetti as long as they have, to be completely honest with you. I would have thought that other coordinator openings at a higher level when they were at JMU may have persuaded them a little bit more, but they're very loyal. And I think, it starts with at the top with Cignetti. And from everything that we've heard, everything he's said, the guy seems like he loves Bloomington, right? How could you not? But I mean, he seems enamored with the city, the campus. I think he's really committed to trying to turn this program into a legitimate, a legitimate presence. And so I wouldn't be as concerned for year one, but I think the coordinators are where I'd be more concerned. There is that loyalty aspect, but I think this is probably going to end up being a multi-year thing for everybody.
Yeah, Daniel, like you said, I would not be too worried about this first year, and coordinators are really what's going to be in the market once the season's over for Cignetti. I mean, he's 63. It's how much moving, how many times does he want to move again? He's already moved a few times in his career, and it seems like he really was able to settle into Bloomington. Like you said, he loves this city and has kind of embraced this Hoosier culture right from the get-go. So with the coordinators, and especially, I mean, one of them you have to imagine at the end of the year are going to be getting some phone calls when things end up getting moved around. It's just part of the game, and I think, you got to trust the ability to reload. So I imagine there already been conversations held at the higher levels of considering the future possibilities.
Bear's mouth with the comment, since pretty much all the old successful staff now leads Alabama, will we actually step up and pay him when it comes down to it? I will say this. I think that while true factually, Bear's mouth, there's some important caveats there. Like, Kalen DeBoer left after a year because he had a head coaching opportunity at the place he had been the offensive coordinator the previous year. You're not going to normally get a guy to stick around as an assistant when a head coaching job's available.
Right.
We fired Nick Sheridan. He got hired by Kalen DeBoer at Washington, resurrected his career, and now he's at Alabama. And Kane Walmick left to go coach South Alabama as a head coach, and then left that job to go be an assistant at Alabama. Even Ray and Ballou, the strength and conditioning guys, Saban hired them to run the strength and conditioning at Alabama. So there is a little bit of a different scenario there. But I think the larger point is well taken. IU, they've managed, I think, at least through the first three games, to capture something pretty special. You can feel the energy around the program. And this is where IU's got to take the next step and make sure that they kind of keep this together. Daniel, I want to let you go, but before we do, going to the next part of this, and I'm going to ask Joe the same question, but I want to ask you first and then let you go. So your first trip to the Rose Bowl, what was the environment like as a student reporter covering that, and just kind of the overall ambiance? Give me it filtered through your eyes, how it felt and what the experience was like.
It was incredible. It's really interesting because I was in Atlanta the week before, and so you get a complete, a complete contrast of styles between a new school, dome, all state-of-the-art everything at Mercedes-Benz, and then you get to the Rose Bowl, and you just walk in and just feel so much history inside those walls. It was really neat. I wish, the students had been there. I think that would have maybe added to the atmosphere. The really special part of it for me was being down there at the end of the game, and you got the entire IU contingency just crowded around the tunnel, and chanting, and you could see how much the program meant to so many people. And I, like Joe, was on the beat last year when there was so much apathy around the program, and to see so many people care about it, and to see, a program that can legitimately make an impact, that part of it was really, really neat. And having covered throughout the spring, throughout the summer, and you hear all the talk about what the program could be, to see it all come to fruition was really neat to see in person. And just, pregame, even our group got there like 5 hours, prior to. Like, it was one of those deals where we wanted to soak it all in and see everything. And we probably made 2 or 3 laps around the stadium, and it was just super cool just kind of seeing all that. And it was one of those deals where I was looking down at my phone and I was like, why am I on my phone? I can look at my phone for the next however many years of my life, but I might not have another chance to be at the Rose Bowl. So, so appreciative of you all, and all the incredible people who allowed that trip to happen. It was a whole lot of fun, and one of the absolute highlights of my life so far.
Well, I'm glad it was. I mean, it was. And I want to hear what Joe has to say. It was special for me as well. But Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. We'll let you go get some dinner and get whatever you need to get written for deadline tomorrow. But thank you for joining us from availability. We'll look forward to reading you in the IDS later on this week.
Really appreciate you guys.
All right, thanks. Daniel Flick from the Indiana Daily Student covering IU football joining us here on the show. Joe, let me ask the same question of you, your experience as a student covering this game in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, before I get into kind of my personal experience, I do want to say thank you to you, Galen, and then the rest of like the faculty at IU that allowed 12 students to be able to go out and cover and be a part of that experience. I mean, having one student to cover a football game for IU is one thing, but 12 on the road to go 2,500 miles. I mean, just thank you for that experience. It just goes to show where this program, as a sports media program at IU, has grown from the time that you have been able to build it up. So I hope there's a sense of pride that you have to kind of see all of us out there on the sidelines.
I mean, I've always said, and I wish I could send everybody, but like one of all my favorite moments from when I was a student at IU as an undergrad were from the traveling we did around sporting events. And there was no budget for anything back then. Like, we drove to Penn State a day after getting passes we didn't think we were going to get to broadcast the game, and we managed to figure out a way to get to a couple of NCAA tournaments. So I'm just glad there were a couple of people that didn't get a chance to go, and I felt bad about that, but I was really happy that so many of you got a chance to go out and cover it and just kind of be part of the experience, because it is so unique, and it is such a that will be that's the only first time that IU will play a Big Ten opponent in the Rose Bowl. So I'm glad you all got a chance to be a part of that.
But yeah, the game itself, kind of like Daniel said, we're there 3-4 hours early, just kind of walking around the tailgate scene, seeing everything happen, seeing the large IU contingent that was there, which was really cool to see. And that was probably my favorite moment too. Games coming to an end, all the IU fans, they harp down to where IU ran out of the tunnel, and they are loud. They're making their voices heard. They are cheering for the players, chanting Sig's name. And there was a video that one of my roommates and someone who's on the trip as well, Josh Post, took and tweeted out. It was of Scott Dolson and Pam Whitten saying thank you to everyone that came out. And it was a moment like it looked like Mr. Dolson had a tear in his eye too. And it just, from an athletic director standpoint, to see what has happened for this football team. And then for myself as a junior in college, to say that I've been able to stand on the sideline at the Rose Bowl for a football game, a real football game, not a preseason game, not anything like that. It was incredibly special. It's something that I'll remember for the rest of my life, especially. And it's just very cool. Just everything around it.
My brother-in-law, Eric, who grew up an IU fan, he texted me today, 2 days later. He's like, that might be the most fun I've ever had attending a live sporting event. And I feel the same way. I mean, I went out there. I was in the stands. I was in that group that Daniel was talking about in the corner, saluting the team and saluting the coaching staff as they came off the field. When IU, I think when they scored the touchdown to go up 35-13, I left my family in the stands and I said, I'm going to go high five the IU cheering sections that are up in the corners. And I did. And I ran up there and I started high fiving people. which probably looked a little goofy in retrospect, but I was so overcome with just the joy and kind of, it was almost like a dreamlike state where it's like, I can't believe that not only did IU win a game in the Rose Bowl, and I don't really even care about the level of competition, but like they absolutely just they made it really hard on UCLA to do anything. They dominated the game basically from beginning to end. And I think for you students, like it's such a joy. I was actually telling my kids this when I was walking out of the stadium. Like, I don't know how, I can't explain to you how lucky you are you were here for this, because so many generations of IU fans haven't been able to experience anything even close to this. And yes, it wasn't a bowl game. It was just a game in the Rose Bowl. But the psychological weight that takes off the shoulders of a lot of older fans who have made that trip, and to have it be that enjoyable of a game is really hard to put into words. And I'm just glad that you students get a chance to experience like that in college, because you have to literally go back to when my dad and mom were in college for the last time that you even had a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. And there just haven't been a lot of games that have given that kind of joy. I mean, we've been tossing it around like, the 2019 game at Nebraska was a game that you kind of had a similar feeling coming out of. The 2015 bucket game when Indiana beat Purdue to make it back to a bowl. I mean, there's a couple of others, but that was just a unique joining of circumstance and location and everything else. And what a beautiful venue to play a football game in. We were hearing before the game, like, oh, the place is kind of a dump. And it's like, it's not a dump. It was a nice stadium. It's not, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of like a Mercedes-Benz, but it was absolutely a really cool place to watch a game. And that was really cool to see. Quick couple of comments here before we move on quickly to Charlotte. Ross Dinson, with all the good vibes around the football program, how can IU bring that tailgate experience vibes to basketball? Man, I've talked about this for a while. I don't think it's possible, at least from the alumni side, because there's, basketball games are always at night. It's always cold.
Right.
I've tried tailgating in those environments. It's not a lot of fun. But it's also a different vibe. Like, the games are shorter and there's such a different expectation around basketball. Like, basketball at IU oftentimes it just hasn't been fun. The last time it was really fun all the way through the season was 2013, I would argue. And that was because people knew that team was good coming into the year, and then they were good all throughout the year. And I mean, that was 11 years ago. And yes, 2016 was an excellent season. 2022 was a season that was, or 2023, I guess it was a season where it's like it turned into something that was nice to see, at least in terms of the regular season. But yeah, it's just one of those deals where I don't think you can really translate the type of vibe that you get off of football into basketball. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're just very different types of sports.
Yeah, and like you said, basketball, I mean, a college basketball game at a maximum will go 2.5 hours.
And you're really upset if it goes that long, yes.
You're upset if it goes that long, because that means, players are calling for review for everything. Maybe it goes to OT and you're getting a little extra bang for your buck. But for football, it's an event aside from just a game. I mean, it's already 4 hours. You got to get there an hour early if you want to just, for a GA ticket, you want to get a good seat if you're a student. And that tailgating experience has just been kind of circulating around football for really the longest time. Ever since I've been born, tailgating has been a thing. I imagine it's been before I was born. So I just don't think it's as much of it's possible, but it just doesn't fit the culture of the sports, I'd say.
Yeah. We wanted to get to we got a question from Ryan Cotter actually here. What can IU do to make it easier for fans to get to games from Indy? UCLA buses students 45 minutes from campus. Should we do the same?
It's hard to get a charter flight to
well,
LA.
I think he means fans from Indy coming down to Bloomington, because there is some traffic issues, and it's not so much students as it is alums. Here's the thing, Ryan, the roads are not an excuse anymore if you're coming from Indianapolis. Like, it is
69 is finished.
It's a quick trip down, and look, yes, the parking and the overall setup is not ideal, but anytime you try to put somewhere between 40 and 50,000 people in one spot, the parking and the overall flow is going to be difficult. I mean, to me, I think to some degree, I think IU, frankly, has done a lot to make that circumstance work. And Ryan had an idea here of like a stadium district with bars right around the stadium and arena would be huge for pregame atmosphere. I mean, in the micro, I agree, but the problem is there's no place to put a stadium district around the athletics complex because
there's already living quarters as well.
There's places where people live, like it's apartments and things like that, but it's also like university land where you're not going to like put a commercial district.
Right.
And look, I mean, and there's other colleges, there's other college towns that don't like that are set up very similar to Bloomington in the way the stadiums are on campus and you don't have a district around. I honestly think the best thing IU can do to make it easier for fans to get to games from Indy is make the team good enough that missing the game is not an option. And that really only comes from wins and from playing attractive football. And I think that's what Indiana's done so far. You know, my hope in all of this is that the UCLA win wakes up the people who have not otherwise decided to go to football games. And, you know, I said this in class today. I was like, we should make this weekend like introduce a friend to IU football weekend. You know, volunteer to buy their ticket, drive them down, whatever. But it's like, let's get people in the stadium. And who cares if it's not a great opponent? And Charlotte is not a great opponent. I mean, they're 121st in S&P Plus. They're 1-2. They beat an FCS opponent by 1. They're on their third string quarterback, Joe. They're not a good team right now. But as Scott pointed out on the Mothership show, there's a certain excitement in watching your team beat the hell out of an opponent. You know, I mean, going and watching 6-7 touchdowns being scored, that's fun. Like, isn't that what we want as football fans? You know, what is it that we're doing exactly where we wouldn't want that to be what we go to watch? Why do we only go watch games that IU is likely to lose? I've never quite understood that concept.
Well, I think with this season as compared to others, I mean, last year, something that Daniel mentioned was like how we were there last year, and it was just, you know, the vibes around the team, just you could tell those wheels were falling off the wagon. I mean, the moment they lost, or the moment they went to 4 overtimes against Akron was like, oh, this just is going to be a long year to go through. But for this year, to go to Pasadena, disregard, it doesn't matter what UCLA record ends up. If UCLA ends up, you know, 3-9 in the season, and IU is, who knows? They played them like they were 3-9 and took care of that game like they were 3-9. Now, granted, the record could be fluctuating. They do have a tough schedule, so I think bowling's going to be tough for them. But they went there, took care of business again. This wasn't a game like for the players. There was never a doubt. The moment that game started, they went down, marched down the field, scored. First play UCLA had as a fumble, score again. They're up 14-0. So the vibes around the team was, they're taking care of business right there. And the national attention I started to gain, and just saw a comment here about how Joe Buck, he actually mentioned he was singing the Indiana fight song on last night, just briefly. But there has been national attention around this team. I mean, saw the graphic 23% chance to make the playoffs. Pat McAfee shouting out Kurt Signetti yesterday on his show. There's a buzz around this team that Galen, I mean, have you seen this?
No, I mean,
even 2020, yes, there was buzz, they were winning games, but
yeah, it was
2020.
It was a different thing. Yeah, it was a crazy time. And look, as Justin points out in the comments, according to many, and it's not just FPI. I mean, IU's favored in all their remaining games except Ohio State. And look, again, there are limitations on what the stats and the projections can do because they're just looking at the input. But I mean, Bill Connolly, who's one of our favorite stats people, who runs the S&P Plus statistic for ESPN, you know, that I think Indiana's still in the 30s or 40s, or maybe it's around there in S&P Plus. But that is still factoring in last year. If you take it and you just have this year's performances, Indiana is 8th in S&P Plus because they have won so convincingly against the opponents that they've played. And look, all of this has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt, in as much as there's a lot of season to play, and this is still a team that is fully figuring itself out. But I think it is okay, if you're an IU fan, to be irrationally exuberant and confident, even if it doesn't pan out, have fun with it. Like, don't worry about, well, maybe we're not actually that good. And that, because that type of enthusiasm spreads. It's funny, like I got a text from my mom after the game who hadn't seen the score. And she's like, I had no idea IU was so dominant. I was like, well, go listen to the podcast I recorded. And then she did. And she's like, wow, they really were good. And I'm like, yeah. And it's like that helps to build enthusiasm amongst your fellow fans. And I think if you're already following IU football, you kind of have a responsibility to evangelize IU football to those who aren't excited about it yet. Because I think there's something special. It feels like there's something special going on with this particular group of coaches and players. And this next week, if they go out and play really well and they can fine tune, which is really what they're going to need to do, continue to fine tune both offense and defense, get rid of some of the penalties, get rid of, some of the running. There were some running issues this week. There were passing issues the previous week. It's still going to be a little bit of work in progress, but you get through this upcoming game, you're a third of the way through the season. And you've only got 2/3 left, and those are all conference games. After this Charlotte game, this is essentially the last tune-up. It's going to be really important to get people involved and going with this. And I think it's exciting for fans who already are going, let's get some more people out there, would be what I would say. And I think students, same thing. If I'm a student, I'm like, it's a noon kick. This is great. I can go and I can still have the rest of my day to do whatever I want. There's not really a good excuse for not being out there for multiple, like 3 or 4 quarters, not just 2.
I think with how this past week went, that performance in Pasadena, an IU fan, it's hard to not be optimistic and think that there should be 3 more conference wins, along with what is likely a win against Charlotte. So you got to think that 7 wins is a very likely scenario at this point. When going into the year, there was so much unknown, just new coach, new team, so many new players, but the way they performed, and yes, obviously, like you said, with all the analytics, the FPI, it's all just the input of stats that they have. But the eye test, they have passed that too. They've been mature when faced with any sort of give. In the UCLA game, 2 ejections, when UCLA brought it to 2 scores, a 2-score game 2 separate times. Start of the second half and start of the fourth quarter, they scored to bring it down to 2 scores, and IU immediately responded with long drives down the field to regain that 3-score lead. And like you said, it was the score to put it up 35-13. That was really like, oh, they just did this. They have come in here and whooped a conference opponent in their own stadium, in a historic stadium at that. So I just think if there are fans roaming around that are questioning, go see it for yourself. And I think especially this week, there'll be something to enjoy from it.
And it's funny because Steve said just 7 wins. Are we only playing 8 games? And I knew that somebody was going to react to that. And I'm going to finish with this stat, Steve, and I understand your reaction. In the last 30 years, how many seasons has Indiana finished with 7 or more wins? Do you know, Joe?
Is it 1?
It's 2.
I knew about 2019. I don't know if there would be another one in there.
2019 and 2007 are the only 2 seasons where Indiana has won more than 6 games in a season.
So there has to be a bit of
7 wins is look. I mean, I know people, and I got a ton of people in my group chats and texting me individually. Like, is the floor 10 wins? It's like, let's pump the brakes slightly, not to the point where we're not enthusiastic, but
right.
We predicted 8-4. Both Scott and I did on the preseason podcast for Crimson Cast. A lot of people were like, wow, you guys are really being overly optimistic. So you never know what's going to happen when you get into conference play, but even a 7-win season, if you had said before the year, hey, let's do this, let's just take 7 wins and walk away with it, most people would have grabbed that check without a second thought. And so let's just keep that in mind as we move forward. Anyway, Joe, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Really, my last thought is this is something I'm excited 2 weeks from now. When we come back, we have the show after the Maryland game, and we talk about the crowd for that. Because this team is trending to start 4-0 on the season and hosting their second Big Ten conference game in 2 weeks. And I think that will be very interesting to see the response. We've talked about, week 1, saying that he was like, oh, wish they stayed the entire game. There was a good turnout, but they didn't stay the whole game. And then obviously Western Illinois is Western Illinois.
Right.
I think week 5, there could be a strong 54,000 for 4 quarters.
Yeah, it's We'll see what happens as we move forward. As Steve notes, it's not fair to hold any of us responsible for what we said before the year. I agree. I will not be held responsible for anything I said before the year either. But look, I appreciate everybody joining us here on Tuesday Night Bison Chat. We always have a ton of fun doing this. We'll be back with more next week, hopefully after a big win for IU as they take on Charlotte over the weekend. Our thanks to Daniel Flick from the Indiana Daily Student for joining us, and my thanks, as always, to my co-host here, Joe Cronin. Emily Fox off this week. She'll be back next week, and we'll look forward to bringing you more. Thank you all for tuning in, whether you're doing so live or whether you do so later. For all those folks and for the Back Home Network, I'm Galen Clavio saying thanks for joining us here on the Tuesday Night Bison Chat. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.